Now to the sensational dumping of Queensland's Assistant Health Minister. The Premier sacked Dr Chris Davis for breaching Cabinet solidarity after he threatened to cross the floor over changes to the CMC. Dr Davis had also been a critic of his own government during the doctors' contract dispute. To discuss the dramatic dismissal, he joined me in the studio earlier today. Chris Davis, did you expect to be sacked?
Not directly. I was aware, of course, that I was in a difficult position, needing to represent the views initially of the senior doctors and subsequently issues around the CMC changes, and that had created this awareness, and as such I was open to a number of options.
So tell me about this meeting that happened on Tuesday night.
The Premier requested, and of course I was very happy to attend, and I went in there very keen to put aside my Assistant Minister role if that gave me greater liberty to better represent my electorate on issues that are really fundamental in our democracy, issues that get to the core of accountability of politicians, and issues that have been highlighted at ICAC, for example, in New South Wales.
Now, you didn't resign, you were sacked, but you're saying that you would have resigned anyway.
I had indicated in communication my willingness to do so. I reiterated that again at the meeting. My impression was, and of course the Premier is very entitled to do as he sees fit, my impression is that he wanted to send a very clear message and chose instead to sack me.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong here, but you're the first person in the ministry to be sacked, aren't you?
That is my understanding.
So David Gibson, Ros Bates, Bruce Flegg all had the option to resign. Does that sting?
It doesn't sting me so much, but if you look at social media, there has been a lot of concern about what sort of message it sends in terms of our style of government in Queensland, our tolerance, I guess, of democracy.
Do you think it would have afforded you a dignified exit had you been allowed to take the option that the other ministers had been given of tendering a resignation?
Clearly, when I asked for that, I could not complain, and so it would have been a very much more dignified way. I mean, the Premier has indicated, I think, that he has released me. Well, I probably would have preferred to be released on my own terms.
You think it was a signal to everybody that he was being tough?
I think it was a signal on a number of fronts. I think it was not just the technicality of the Cabinet solidarity message. I think I had trod on some very powerful toes. We had a situation on Thursday where the Treasurer, Tim Nicholls, had made a media comment, as I recall it, that the LNP was a very broad church. And the scenario changed between then and when I was called in on Tuesday, and I suspect that, as I say, was a number of complaints to the Premier, and he felt obliged to send a message.
Powerful interests, you're saying?
Well, you only need to look across the border to New South Wales to actually see, under current arrangements, how there are a number of very powerful interests in any political system. I mean, the case of Jodie McKay, the Labor member for Newcastle, who'd declined really to accept election funding from a very powerful coal baron who wanted to put up a coal terminal in Newcastle. And instead, the coal baron went to her colleagues, her Labor Party colleagues, and they appear to have assisted in her not getting re-elected. So there are certainly, as I say, these sort of forces at work in Australian politics.
But they're also in Queensland politics, you're saying?
Well, you know, you'd be naive to think that the political gene pool changed when you crossed the border from New South Wales to Queensland.
But what is it that you would have done that would threaten these powerful interests?
Well, you don't make an investment in business unless you expect a return on it. And so there are questions, and we have a situation where the Attorney-General himself has indicated that our CMC was not working well. And we have a way to go before we get it up to the standard that is envisaged. And the other area that I flagged as of concern was the changes to the electoral laws, particularly the donations to political parties. And we have at the moment on the table a great relaxation of caps and donations and so on, just at the same time that the new Premier of New South Wales, Mike Baird, is actually saying that he needs to nail shut the back door to government because it is actually causing so much damage to his party and indeed the public interest.
So you believe that your forthcoming opposition to these changes to donations, political donations, is a factor in the Premier moving against you?
You'd have to ask him, but I'd certainly flagged it both in a recent speech in Parliament and also in my letter to him. I wanted to be completely open and honest and say, listen, I have great concerns. I'm not alone. As I say, there's Mike Baird, there's Christopher Pyne, the federal leader in the coalition there, and he has likewise called for donations to political parties to actually be limited just to the public and effectively excluding big business and unions.
You've been booted from Cabinet. Will you stay a member of the LNP and contest the next election?
I'm very committed to my electorate. I'm also very committed to my party, and I don't want any more messages like we got at Redcliffe or the polls that have followed them. I think we're capable of much greater things. I think it's actually a distraction, and so I hope that we can address these very issues very quickly so that, as Sir Robert Menzies pointed out, when we actually have to balance between vested interest, self-interest and the public interest is the only item on the agenda.
Do you think the LNP will pre-select you?
That is entirely a matter for the LNP, and as I say, I believe I'm being absolutely loyal to the vision that was before the people of Queensland prior to the last election, that is actually core to the founder of the Liberal Party and Conservative politics, and whether or not I'm a person to be pre-selected is a matter for the party.
All right, Chris Davis, thank you very much for joining 7:30 Queensland.
Pleasure. Thank you, Matt.
Spokesman for the Premier says Dr Davis never raised any concerns about the electoral donation laws with either himself or the Attorney-General, and any claim that he did is completely wrong.